to the second Digital Editions Live event, which will take further the topic of animals, but now not only seeing animals, but traveling to meet them. And it's a pleasure to welcome a whole host of zookeepers this week, comprising, and that's particularly pleasing, 3 generations of history of the book students. So we have come back of Jasmin Leuchtenberg from Bonn, who was here as an Erasmus student for her master, working on the Arnold von Harff manuscript. We have back Aysha Strachan, who did also her history of the book project 3 years ago, and Mary Boyle, obviously now part of the Oxford setup, but who's done actually her dissertation on the topic, and joined by the editors who have been doing their internship over last term working on the digital editions project, Agnes, Hilger and Eva Neufeind. We have next week early printed holdings, but I'll hand over now for the running order and for the emceeing of the whole to Dr. Mary Boyle, who is one of our early career fellows in the Faculty of Medieval and Modern Languages. Over to you, Mary.
Thanks, Henrike. Can you hear me okay? So good afternoon, everyone. As you've just seen from Henrike's slides, we've got some really exciting launches coming up, but the one today is the one I'm particularly excited about. This is Agnes, Hilger and Eva Neufeind's digital edition of MS Bodleian 972, which contains the pilgrimage account of the German knight Arnold von Harff, give or take a couple of folios. So Henrike has asked me to MC proceedings today, so I'll just start by giving a quick rundown of how we're going to manage the next hour or so. First, I'll introduce you to Arnold von Harff himself, and then I'll hand over to Eva and Agnes, who will talk us through their edition. After that, we'll take a look at the manuscript itself with Aysha Strachan, who's going to tell us about its journey to Oxford. Lastly, we'll hear more about the account's transmission and excitingly have the opportunity to compare Bodleian 972 with 2 other copies of Harff's Reisebericht, one from Trier and one from Bonn. So we'll hear first from Henrike Lähnemann about the transmission, and then from Jasmin Leuchtenberg, who, as Henrike mentioned, is another Oxford alumna who's spent plenty of time with Bodleian 972 herself, and she's going to talk us through a digitisation of the Bonn manuscript. Now, before we go any further, let's answer the question, who was Arnold von Harff? I can just give you some of the facts of his life: names, dates, social status. Now, that last point is probably the one he'd like me to begin with, judging by the fact that he never seems to get tired of reminding his audience that he was a knight and an aristocrat. He introduces himself on the very first page as I, Arnold von Harff, a knight by birth, and this phrase comes back again and again. When he's made a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, part of the preamble is that he affirms his knightly heritage and noble descent. So let's put some names and dates on that aristocratic family. Arnold was the middle son of Adam von Harff, a nobleman, obviously, and he was born at the family seat of Schloss Harff in Bedburg. Now, if you want to visit Schloss Harff, I'm afraid I've got some bad news for you. The regional authorities saw fit to allow its demolition for the sake of open-cast brown coal mining in 1972. The area around the site of the castle has been re-landscaped, and there's now a stone with a commemorative plaque for the castle, and a little way away, a memorial for the village of Morkenharf, which was demolished too. So back to Arnold, and at the age of about 25, he set out from Cologne on a rather ambitious programme of pilgrimage. He apparently planned as highlights, get ready, Rome, Sinai, Jerusalem, Santiago de Compostela, St. Patrick's Purgatory on Locher, and Wilsnack. Now, he did reach the first 4, and also apparently made it to many further flung locations, some of them evidently only by travelling on the page. Now, a fair amount of his account is evidently carried over from other sources, including but not limited to Marco Polo, Orderic of Pordenone, Ptolemy, and most significantly Mandeville's travels. As I said, Harff didn't make it to Vilsnack or Ireland, despite these vast travels that he claims. He returned home in 1498 or 1499. In 1504, he married Margarete von den Bongart and followed his uncle in the post of hereditary chamberlain at the court of Guelders. Now, his story, I'm afraid, has a rather sad ending. He died only a year later in 1505, leaving his wife pregnant. Their daughter died too in early childhood and was buried with him. But his writing has survived, and it was fairly popular locally amongst members of his own social class. It was circulated in manuscript into the 17th century, though it wasn't printed until 1860, when it was edited by Eberhard von Groote. Now, I just want to finish my introduction by putting Harff into a broader context. The medieval Holy Land pilgrimage was a real mass undertaking, no pun intended. The Hospital of St. John, where many pilgrims stayed while in Jerusalem, could accommodate 2,000 people a night. Even if we take a deeply pessimistic view about how much we've lost, only a tiny fraction of these pilgrims wrote about their experiences. There are about 260 surviving accounts of pilgrimage produced by Western Europeans between 1301 and 1540, and just under 2/3 of those are written after 1460. And of those, a huge proportion was written by Germans, about 90 in comparison to 15 of French origin and even fewer of English. So Harff was in a minority in writing, but as a German pilgrim author, he wasn't terribly unusual. And so his enduring popularity amongst his fellow nobles maybe isn't that surprising. So that's a very brief introduction to Arnold von Harff himself. And I'm now going to hand over to Agnes and Aoife to talk us through their amazing project.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I hope everyone can hear and see me. Great. So yeah, my name is Agnes. I'm normally a master's student from Würzburg in Germany. But as Henrike mentioned before, I spent last term at Oxford as an Erasmus intern. And together with my fellow intern Eva, we started working on a digital edition of manuscript Bodleian 972. And yeah, I think today is the best example that there seems to be an ongoing interest in both the Reisebericht and the Bodleian manuscript. So we hope that our project might actually be of some use for all the people interested in Arnold and, well, hopefully, especially for some of you as well. So next slide, please, Henrike. As you probably all know, the only edition of the Reisebericht so far is the one from Eberhard von Groote from the 19th century. And both the translations, the one into German and the one into English, are based on this edition. And well, as the Groote edition is now over 150 years old, it's quite obvious that there are some issues with it. And the main problem is that all three manuscripts Groote used are lost today. So we can't detect in detail where he made changes. And yeah, these and other problems actually have been uttered since the 80s. And so in the 90s, Volker Honemann and Hartmut Beckers planned to create a new edition, which was supposed to be based on Groote's text. So they wanted to correct obvious mistakes on Groote's part and also to compare the text to the Maria Laach manuscript. And the reason behind this idea is that the lost manuscript A, used by Groote as a basis, is believed to be from the 15th century. So it should be quite close to the original by Arnold himself. I personally believe that it would have been a better idea to work with the remaining manuscripts in the first place, but anyway, this edition was never published. By the way, I didn't find out why until now, so I'm grateful for any hints on the subject. So I think next slide, please. Well, yeah, so here you can see a preview of our digital edition project. In the beginning, Eva and me were just planning to edit a few of the episodes from Arnold's travels for our History of the Book project. But then eventually we realized that a transcription of the whole travelogue might actually be much cooler and, of course, of much more use to everyone. But on the other hand, as you all know, the text is quite extensive. The manuscript from the Bodleian consists of, I think, 167 folios. So that's quite a lot. So that was the point where I came up with the idea to use the HTR technology of the transkribus software. This technology works with machine learning. So if you will, the program can learn to read a certain handwriting. Transkribus provides several pre-trained models, but it also allows you to train your own on the manuscript you're working with. So that's what we did. First, we fed the program with about 30 pages of text that I transcribed manually. And we were actually surprised how well it worked from the beginning on. The first model we trained had an error rate of around 6.5%. So that means that of 100 characters, around 6 or 7 are transcribed wrong. That is actually more than you would expect, and I actually intended to show you some examples for that kind of problems and transcriptions. But since transkribus has had server problems for the last few days, that was not possible, unfortunately. So the idea is that you improve your model by recognizing more and more pages and then manually correct them and then retrain your model after. So in theory, your model is supposed to get better from training to training. And we retrained our model 5 times so far. And here on this figure, you can see how it got better in the beginning and then actually worse and then a little better again and so on. But now we have an error rate of around 3%, which is actually quite good, I think. But I hope it's gonna get better in the future still. So anyway, there are still some things that are hard to learn for the computer. This especially concerns the distinction between U and N, for example. These letters look totally the same in the manuscript in most of the cases, and you can just distinct them by context, but the computer hasn't learned that so far. And for example, also capital letters are transcribed wrong quite often because they are just not as popular in the manuscript. There's just not enough data yet. So also the HTR model is of great help to us already and maybe will be of even greater help in the future. In the end, we will still need a human being, and in our case, that means Eva and me, to correct the transcriptions, of course. And that actually concerns also some other issues we are dealing with in the encoding process, which Eva will tell you more about now.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. I am Eva, and I'm a master student from the University of Düsseldorf, and I also spent Hilary term in Oxford. And as Mary pointed out in her introduction, Arnold never got really tired of talking about how noble he is and how many adventures he went on. So we can say that the travelogue of Arnold is a huge collection of data, and he compiled an impressive amount of data about different languages, and also clearly structured all the places he visited. He always used the words item van, which means then to, then from, and that made it fairly easy to see exactly where he would travel from and which would be the next location. So Agnes and I wanted to transfer Arnold's neat collections of data into our own digital edition. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. To encode the alphabet, we created vector images for every letter in Arnold's alphabet. We have to especially thank Sebastian Douce Miller for coming up with this brilliant idea. because it just makes the whole digital edition look very good. So this kind of image can be created by using any sort of image editing program. In case of our edition, we used GIMP, and we were able to isolate the letters by using the color scheme of the image and exporting it into another file. And to make it readable, we would paint it black with a virtual paintbrush. So to clearly structure the whole alphabet afterwards, we made a table which would show the names of the letters in the row above, and then put in the images we created. And this is actually a very crucial point, to just name the images in a logical sense. And in our case, we used the row number and then the place in the row where the letter would be found. And this clear structure makes it possible to compare the whole alphabet to other alphabets in other manuscripts. And yeah, next slide, please. This is another thing which is very interesting and then very work intense part of our project. So we recently started to work on another way to visualize Arnold's travels. And because of the transparency of all the places, cities, and villages he visited, we had the idea to create a map. Here we have to thank Mary Boyle for sharing some coordinates with us to easily map the part of his travels from Cologne to Jerusalem. In the first step, it was necessary to note down all the different place names. We are not completely finished with that, and at the moment we are at over 320 places we have to map down. And as you can imagine, when you have a travelogue written in dialect, it's very difficult to actually find all the place names, especially when Arnold wasn't there himself and he copies it from other manuscripts. And so this has been proven to be difficult sometimes, but I'm very optimistic that we will get that done in time. And once we know all the places Arnold visited, we have to search for coordinates, which can be found over Google or other GPS sites. There are actually very many trackers, so if you ever plan to do such a project yourself, feel free to try any you find. And yeah, we started using an amazing tool called Palaeogaphy, which allows you to visualize the coordinates and put them into a graph, a network, or a map. And yeah, in this picture, you, as I said, see the travels of Arnold from Cologne to Jerusalem. And this will get bigger and bigger by time. So thank you for listening to me, and I hand over to Aysha to talk about the journey of the manuscript.
Thanks very much, Aoife and Agnes. I'd just like to congratulate you on your amazing project and efforts in making this fantastic digitalization, and how much effort you've put into that. Like, it's a really difficult job and you've done it a world of justice. Yeah, so I'm Aysha Strachan. I'm actually a third-year PhD at King's College London and the Humboldt Universität in Berlin. And I don't really do much with manuscripts anymore. So I was more than delighted when Henrike and Mary got in touch to talk about this new digitalization of my master's project manuscript. I got very protective over it at the time, and this is MS Bodley 972. And so what we're going to do is I was going to get Andrew Dunning from the Bodleian to live present to us today the manuscript and help me to show you some interesting things I found out 3 years ago about the provenance. Here we go, look at this. I think there's a picture of Greek men, is it, Mary? Is this the Greek? No, it's not the Greeks. Who is it in this image, do you know?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but it's not the Greeks.
It's one of the collection of interesting folks that Arnold has come across. But I'm here to talk to you actually about the provenance. So this was my big master's project back in the day. So in the year 1813, the Bodleian Library acquires what we have the pleasure of viewing today, which is Arnold von Harff's travelogue of his pilgrimage to the Holy Land between the years of 1496 and 99. It's believed to be dated around 1554. And my mission 3 years ago at Oxford was to find out as much as I could about the provenance of the manuscript, because there were a few question marks remaining as to who a mysterious Karl Etter is in association with MS Bodleian 972. So first, if we could look at the binding, please, Andrew, then we shall see this brown leather binding on wooden boards, and it's sealed by 2 metal clasps there. And the use of metal clasps for practical purposes is actually a trend. One of them's broken, we can see here. Yeah, perfect view of them there. Quite ornamental. And the use of metal clasps for practical purposes actually died out around the 16th century. So I had the impression when I first handled this manuscript in the Western Library 3 years ago, you know, this is something quite precious. It's of ornamental value, and it's something that was passed down to be kept within the family. So to identify changes in provenance, we can look at a series of deep scratches and stamps on the leather. So if we turn to the front of the binding there, Andrew, you shall see that there's lots of deep scores. And in the top hand corner on the right there, you can see an attempt at removing the leather from the wooden board. And this could be an intent to remove the binding altogether and rebind it afresh. So I had the impression that with every kind of scoring and scratch, somebody was trying to say, look, this book belongs to me now, okay? But it is possible that somebody used it as a chopping board, although you'd always like to think that that's not the case. And we see a series of stamps here with Latin mottos and owner's initials. Lex Prosendata 1563 PB, another Mors Ero Mors Tua, a third Echevergo Conchi 1563 NP, and additionally there are several religious stamps. We can see Christ on the cross in the middle, and a panel on the top inscription reading O Jesu Fili Dei, and a stamp AO 1580 suggesting a change in ownership from the 1563 provenance. Peter Jorgensen argues that there's a possibility that these initials PB and NP were names within the Borgart and Bordschied of Boyle family, to whom the von Harff family are closely connected. Family is so important to the Harffs. The illuminations throughout the manuscript are actually quite quick, sort of relatively careless pen and wash drawings, likely copied from another manuscript quite quickly. But if we now turn, please, Andrew, to folio 4 recto, we should be able to see the Knight Arnold von Harff pointing quite proudly, I'd say, at the von Harff family crest. And we can see a noticeable difference here to the picture of the men that we saw from Arnold's travels in turbans. The illuminator's taken considerable care over this family crest. This is where we see the most care taken over the details here. So it seems as though it's a bit of a mission to assert that the von Harff family is quite special and family matters really do matter. If we turn now to the flyleaf on folio 3 recto, we will see a flyleaf written in the Low Franconian dialect of Ripuarian, which is found in the West German Rhineland, and it actually gets its name, I had to look this up, from Ripper, which is the Latin for riverbank. And this tells of the mother of Arnold von Harff and her marriage history in this handwriting, which is roughly contemporary with the manuscript. Jorgensen identifies that the inscriptions are actually identical with the Munich manuscript of Arnold von Harff's Reisebericht, only ours is written in a much larger hand. So here it basically details marital matters of the von Harff family. It reads that the aforementioned Lord Arnold von Harff's mother was a daughter of the Hermann family, and he was a wife of the von den Borngard family, who's still alive and resides in Breitenbenden Castle. So, if you followed that, mother of so-and-so and daughter of so-and-so, quite confusing. I had to do a bit of digging. So as it turns out, in 1675, Johann Wilhelm Mirbach was to become the new owner of the Harff family castle. So this is the background to this. And so having married Johann Damien von Harff's sister, Maria Barbara, there's this insistence on the long lineage of the Harff family. And this is basically supporting the claim that the family wished to keep hold of as many manuscript editions as possible, and that the family is particularly proud to provide evidence of Arnold von Harff's noble lineage. And as Mary's already said, this is something he really goes on about. It's something that lots of knights do as well. It's just like, look at me, I'm noble, I promise I'm noble. Yes, so it's really interesting, I think, that we see that marital matters and family matters are so important. We see this as soon as we open the manuscript. But this travelogue did not stay in the Harff family forever, and I found myself in a bit of a wild goose.
Aysha, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, my computer just went for a bit of a interesting trip somewhere else. So I was just saying that the travelogue did not stay in the Harff family forever, and that 3 years ago I found myself on what was to become a very wild goose chase for who owned the manuscript before it came to Oxford, asking myself, you know, how did it make this trip to Oxford? So if we turn to the end of the manuscript now, please, Andrew, and take a look at folio 167 recto, we're going to see a poem from the book collector F.W. van Klipping, and he wrote this wonderful poem on Space Down. I'm just going to take a look at it now. There it is. So this is folio 167 recto. It reads: Memento nuissima in aeternum non peccabis, auf Gott hoffe und vertraue, auf Menschen zur Sag gar nicht baue. Gott ist allein der Glauben hält, sonst ist kein Glaub mehr in der Welt. Manche fraget mich, wie es mir geht, hab ich schon Glück, es ist ihm leid, Liebe in Ehren kann niemand wehren, die Zeit endet alles. And then 1654, den 4. January. So in the first line we see this memento mori of Ecclesiasticus 7:40, in all thy works be mindful of thy last end and thou wilt never sin. But I'm particularly interested in Klipping's final line here, die Zeit endet alles. It's quite an apt way of thinking of this whole manuscript, actually, as the provenance changes throughout the years, manuscripts and the book as an object changes accordingly. And so too do the attitudes of the handlers of such objects. Some are willing to scratch off the binding, whereas others want to put their stamp on it or write poems therein. So it is this kind of living, breathing object that's changed very much with each change of ownership. I'm going to be really annoying to Andrew and ask him to turn back to the inside upper board so that we can take a further look into the provenance here. Here we're going to see an ex libris, which belongs to Klipping, our poet. So if we could turn to the front of the manuscript, we should see the ex libris on the inner front cover. And we're going to see that there's been an attempt to scratch it away. Here we go, and stamp on it a very bold red seal. And this might possibly indicate a new trend in making an ex libris, in erasing the previous provenance with a view towards quite literally putting one's stamp on the book. So I was asking myself, who might this seal belong to? And if we open this letter on the next folio, we will see a letter bequeathing this book to the Bodleian Library. dated 1813. And it is a letter from Mr. Carl Etter to Bodlei's then librarian, Mr. Bulkeley Bandernel. And I was there doubting that I could read English when I read this name. Bulkeley Bandernel, it's quite bizarre. So here we go. Here is Mr. Carl Etter's letter. It's dated London, the 8th of November 1813. Buckingham Place, Fitzroy Square, to Mr. Bulkeley Bandernel, M.A., F of N.C., which I had to do some digging. That actually means Fellow of New College. Sir, I have the liberty to send to you the promised German manuscript, Arnold von Harff, 1500, and my Russian diploma of the Royal Economical Society of St. Petersburg, proud to represent them most respectively pro memoria of the underwritten, this the 8th of November 1813, to the Bodleian Library of the University of Oxford. I have the honour to be, sir, your most obedient and very humble servant, Carl Etter, Friday the 8th of November 1813. And then little Latin motto, mala grammatica non vitiat chartem, bad grammar does not vitiate the deed. But nobody and almost none of the internet has anything to offer on Mr. Carl Etter, let alone how he came to own such a German manuscript and this wonderful travelogue. How did it end up in his hands? How is he connected to it? And this was my mission. His diploma is also lost to the void, sadly. Perhaps he wanted to send it to prove to Mr. Bulkeley Bandernel that he is a scholarly man of repute, and yeah, I'm not sure why he would want to send the diploma, but we don't have it, unfortunately. If we turn to 162 Vecto now, Andrew, please. We can see Etter was the one, you recognise the handwriting, I hope, to sum up the whole of this travelogue at the very end. He writes, drum roll please. Oh, the suspense. He writes another little Latin motto, okay? I promise it's worth the wait. Yes, so if we, oh, is that not 162? If we just turn the page, please, Andrew, just one more page, and it should be, yeah, just there at the end. It reads, Bene acte vitae recordatio lustissima est. A life well lived is a most fitting recollection, and it's very consistent with Carl Etter's handwriting, and this stamp is quite possibly his as well. So just who is Carl Etter? Now, I really had to become a bit of a stalker now, and I found an annual of scientific breakthroughs from 1816 on Google Books in very small writing, and I discovered news of his research into mineral composites. He also goes by the anglicised name of Charles Etter, and it turns out he collected many curious items, which fits in with my thinking that this is a bit of a collectible. He collected this Chinese goddess statue, and he produced his own drawing of which and catalogued it with a little description where he declares himself Caroli Etteri Mineralogi e Antiquari Petropoli, Carl Etter, mineralogist and antiquarian of St. Petersburg. Etter sent this drawing of the goddess to Göttingen via Ritter von Struve, whereupon I found his signature and the very same stamp we find in this manuscript with a red seal we've seen already on the inner board of this manuscript. So St. Petersburg societies would have been just the kind of place for Etter to come into contact with book collectors of illuminated travel manuscripts such as this one. And the decision to address Mr. Bandernel was absolutely no coincidence. He was known for his interest in travelogues, and he was given a grant, I found out, in 1811, with which to purchase foreign manuscripts, such as the William Way travelogue, which is now also housed in the Bodleian. Before sending it to Oxford, it seems that Etter's gone to great lengths to fix some frailer parts of the manuscript, and I discovered that he's the one that has reinforced the torn genealogical account on folio 3R, and we're going to show you the watermark, but it doesn't come up on that reinforced page so well. But if we turn back to his letter on folio 1R, we can deduce Etter's watermark, which is a Britannia watermark. And Andrew's going to do this really cool thing which he showed me, where he's going to dim the lights, use a light board, and show the contrast so that we can show you the Britannia watermark underneath. So watermarks are a great way of finding out about provenance, tracing down who's owned the manuscript, who's fixed it with paper, who's stuck things in it. And it's also a great tool for dating provenance as well, because you can sort of see what watermarks were particularly popular at what time. So I'm going to leave Andrew to dim the lights, and then we'll show you the Britannia watermark. And it's a watermark that was particularly common in London around 1800. So we know that Etter's also based in London, not just St. Petersburg, from his letter from Fitzroy Square. Here's the light board now. Ought to come up. Do you see it? Yeah, wow. You can see a lot of Roman numerals. If we turn to the next folio, perhaps you can see in the other pages. There we go, that's perfect. That's a really good view. It's actually upside down, but we can see Lady Britannia there with her shield and her sceptre and the crown. So I actually traced the nearest paper seller to Etter's London address on what became, again, a bit of a stalkerish pursuit. I noticed Fitzroy Square is really close to this paper seller in the 1800s, Nathaniel Rogers Hewitt. He's based on the same road. That's a great view, Andrew, thank you. Based on exactly the same road as Etter's London residence in Fitzroy Square, and it's renowned for its Britannia watermark. For the sake of contrast then, if we turn to Clipping's poem at the end of the manuscript, annoyingly, Andrew, that's folio 167 recto, again please, for the poem. I'm going to show you just how it contrasts to Clipping's preferred watermark, his preferred paper. We're going to see it's rather more exuberant. I quite prefer Clipping's, actually. I think he's a bit more of an extravagant man compared to Etter, who's a bit more of a scientist, shall we say. So it helps us to really know who's bought the paper, which is obviously great when you're trying to track down where they are, when they lived, and how they came into contact with the object of the book. And here we can see the feathers of the eagle there. Perhaps we could get a view. Yes, that's perfect, Andrew, that's perfect. Yeah, and we can see this lovely little eagle there with his little ruffly feathers. So this basically concludes my search. So it was basically thanks to Karl Etter entrusting Arnold von Harff's Reisebericht to Bulkeley Bandenel's care at the Bodleian. That's a lovely little image of the watermark. So it's all thanks to Karl then for entrusting the Reisebericht to Bulkeley Bandenel's care at the Bodleian, that I was able to track him down and find out how he came into contact with this manuscript and who he was, in a way of sort of helping to solve the mystery of the provenance of MS Bodley 972 and how this travelogue came to travel to Oxford. So thanks very much for listening, and I'm going to now pass over to Henrike, who's going to talk a little bit more about this edition and its transmission. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Aysha, and thanks, Andrew, for patiently turning back and forth the manuscript. And what we are going to do briefly before going into the transmission is to celebrate the achievement of Agnes and Eva by having a look at the edition itself. And Jasmin has actually promised, as the one with the closest regional accent to the von Harff family, to read us a little bit of the new edition. Jasmin, is that the right opening that I've got there? Can you read it? You're muted still, but now you are. No, you're still muted. So perhaps we, while we wait for Jasmin to get back into speaking, mode. Not yet. I'll just briefly talk about the setup of the edition, where you can individually switch on and off the different tabs and zoom into the manuscript. You can pause it from the picture browser, or you can just click on the folio here in the transcription to go where you want to go. And this is the line-by-line diplomatic transcription. And it can be expanded also to include things like a normalized edition or like an English translation. And you see that Eva and Agnes have also transcribed the marginalia, for example, in these blocks on the side. And I might go. Can you just, Eva, remind me which folio is the? It's 133.
The alphabet. It's 123 vector.
Yeah. So this is the view of how the vector graphics came out, and the transcription and presentation of here the Hebrew alphabet on the Jüdische Sprach presentation. And you recognize Lehem from Bethlehem, for example, meaning Brot, Moyem, Wasser. So it's also an interesting document because it allows us to learn something about pronunciation, not just of Hebrew, but also of German of that time, if we see the transliteration that Harff uses. Jasmin, are you able to talk? I'm just can. I know what it is. So Jasmin, just change your microphone. Go to audio settings. You probably have picked the wrong microphone, or otherwise just take the headphones off, then it will work. Can you just try to take the headphones off and speak without that? No. Then you have to put them on back again and try to. I think what we'll do now is I'll change over to the presentation of the transmission, and if we have time at the end and Jasmin has sorted out the. Sorry, I just have to find my. Here it is. So I was very pleased to see that among the attendants today is Nathanael Busch, one of the organizers of the Handschriftenzensus, which is the portal which lists all of the manuscripts that have any German language element in them. And you see 15 manuscripts listed here. And among them, the Oxford is at the number 9. You see quite a peculiar feature for a German manuscript spread, in that 3 of these manuscripts are Privatbesitz, so in private ownership. And additionally, Schloss Burg Steinfurt is also private ownership, nobility. All of these are nobility. So that confirms with something that Aysha was tracing back for the provenance of the Oxford manuscript, that it really traveled among the nobility as a treasure object. And it also explains the rather curious fact that all three manuscripts on which the 19th century edition was based were lost, because they all came from the von Harff family collection. What we noticed when editing the Oxford manuscript is that it's really close in spelling, not just in the choice of words, to the 19th century edition. So the Oxford manuscript, despite being fairly late, seems to be very close. And one possible explanation for that could be that the Harff family did something of a vanity publishing project, so that they had their model manuscript copied out time and again and would circulate it among their peers, so that this very peculiar dialect and spelling of the border region between the Netherlands and Germany is replicated. So that's quite a unusual type of manuscript circulation, which also explains why we have so many late manuscripts at a time when you could buy printed editions. Within the nobility, you were still interested in circulating. So I'll very briefly introduce the one of the two manuscripts that have been presented very kindly enough by the Trier Stadtbibliothek, and Michael Embach has done a lightning job in making these available online. And you can see from the image of the knight kneeling at the feet of the three magi. So when visiting the shrine in Cologne, he imagines himself in the presence, that this must have been there in the Trier edition. So Aysha comments that Arnold is much more attractive in the Trier version. It's obviously somebody who has taken more care than the woodcut aesthetics of the Oxford manuscript, which betrays much more that it's written in a time of printed books where you would just color in black and white lines, while this is done with proper highlighting. But again, what you saw in Aysha's presentation is the center of it all, much bigger than Arnold himself, is the coat of arms of the nobility. So hopefully, if this project can be taken a step further, it should be possible to reconstruct much of the lost content of the Trier manuscript by comparing it with a Oxford manuscript. And that's one of the ideas behind the Taylor editions, that they should be able to present side by side different manuscript versions. And Arnold is a very good object for that. The other Trier manuscript isn't illustrated, but shows again the interest of the nobility in this. So this is a later copy of the travelogue that lists a lot of places. And I'm just looking whether we've got by now Jasmin back.
Can you hear me now?
Ja, wunderbar, hervorragend. Because we come now to the Bonn copy, which it will be presented by Jasmin Leuchtenberg, and we had I took this screenshot 3 days ago when there was still 3 dashes at the field of images, Abbildung. And since 2 days ago, we've been able to supplement this with a new link, and Nathanael has already taken initiative to build it into the Handschriftenzensus. So if you go now under the Handschriftenzensus DE 1321.0, you'll find the link to the full digital image of the Handschriftenzensus. So here it is. And I hand over to Jasmin now to talk us through Bonn manuscript.
Okay, I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. Sorry, I've got a feedback here, but now it should be fine, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yes, I'm going to start with the Bonn manuscript, and then maybe I can read out the folio later.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Universitäts- und Landesbibliothek Bonn in Germany owns the manuscript of the travel account of the knight Arnold von Harff, which, according to the year added to the title page, 1591, was written about 40 years after MS Bodley 972. As it is the Oxford copy, I will also refer to this with the siglum O. However, the date entered in O is likely a terminus postquem. The Bonn manuscript probably originated in the Rhineland as well, and was initially in the possession of the University of Duisburg until it came to Bonn in 1818. By now, the WLB Bonn has added the manuscript to their digital collections, and I have already posted the link in the chat. Similar to the Oxford copy, the paper manuscript with the shelf mark S447 is bound in leather decorated with stamps and contains no text other than the travelogue of Arnold von Harff. The clasps are no longer preserved and have been replaced by cloth bands. It has 3 different page countings. The original counting is 40 as it counts folios 19 to 92 twice. I follow the foliation inscribed in pencil at the top right of the recto pages, which also includes the fly leaves. Accordingly, the manuscript still contains 181 leaves with folio 16 missing, but included in the count. Folio 15 is blank. The manuscript has similar dimensions as the Oxford copy. It is slightly larger and contains fewer lines on average per page. As in O, the text is written in 1 column. Glossaries are in 2 or 4 columns. In contrast to O, S447 contains a title page with extensive information about the work. The scribe also names himself here. Geschrieben durch Petrem Ganz von Rattingen. The script contains cursive elements. I was wondering whether it might be Kanzleibastarda or Kurrentschrift. Maybe we can discuss this later. I'm not really a script expert. And the script is definitely younger than the script that is used in O, which preserves the Bastarda as an older script from the late 14th and 15th century. Also, the language of the manuscript, Lower Rhenish, is nearer to High German in comparison. The text is written in black ink and does not contain rubrications as they are found in MS Bodley. There are occasional underlinings and numerous annotations by different hands. Several hands, now literal hands, sometimes better, sometimes worse drawn, should draw attention to important pages, and one such hand can also be seen on folio 173 recto, which is shown in the PowerPoint. Oh no, the one before. Yeah, perfect, thanks. The manuscript contains 39 color drawings with pen and ink. It generally seems that the illustrations are very stable and authentic in their transmission. Insofar as pictures of manuscripts are available for comparison, they always appear very similar, even though there can be light varieties in the colors that are used, whether colors are used at all, or how detailed the images are. The Bonn manuscript uses a similar color range as the Oxford copy, but it designs the coloring and certain details differently. Sometimes the illustrations overlap with the text. They have most likely been drawn after the text was written. The features of the faces are distinct, yet the color wash filling is not too carefully done. The illustration in MS Bodley 972 on folio 13 verso, which shows von Harff and St. Peter, is not present in S447 and may have been included on the missing leaf. On the other hand, folio 169 recto in the Bonn manuscript shows an execution scene in Spain, which is missing in MS Bodley and which was probably drawn on the missing folio, the counterpart of folio 140 in the choir. That would have been expected between folios 146 verso and 147 recto. In addition, the manuscript shows the family coat of arms in connection with the image of the pilgrim Arnold von Harff, which has not been added to some of the illustrations in MS Bodley 972. A peculiarity is that in various places, S447 compiles illustrations that appear on distinct pages in MS Bodley 972. This can also be seen, for example, on folio 173 recto, which combines the illustrations which appear on folios 148 recto and 152 recto in MS Bodley 972. The last pen and ink drawing, now we can change the slide. Yes, thank you. The last pen and ink drawing has no equivalent in the tradition of the Pilgrim's account. It is the only page-spanning illustration and appears on folio 181 recto after the Finis Libri. This full-page illustration shows an opulent floral structure, and in a banner below, a self-confident Rhenish female illustrator proudly reveals her name and her place of work. Gemalt zu essen durch mich, Katrin Abraham. It is striking that just as MS Bodley 972, the Bonn manuscript has only one text, even though this is not unusual for the transmission of von Harff's pilgrimage, just as the fact that before Grote's edition in 1860, the text only existed in the form of manuscripts, even though printing was already available. These characteristics lead to the question of the recipients of the text. Arnold von Harff was a nobleman in the region of Jülich, as we've heard before. Not only did he note down his travel experiences in honor of the Duke of Jülich and his wife, but the text was also meant to secure fame and reputation. All the manuscripts of which the origin and provenance is known were initially produced and kept in the Rhineland and Westphalia. The manuscripts were spread among the nobility, which was strongly related to the family von Harff. It was probably perceived as an historical memento which strengthened familial solidarity. The texts have stayed in the libraries of noble families, and for those that form part of a codex, the context of transmission is usually concerned with the nobility as well. Yeah, that's it. Very quick. Thank you very much. Should I read out the folio number 4 again? Give it.
That would be brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I'm very sorry about the technical incident. I don't know. Okay. This is the dedication on the first page, and I try some fantasy rheinisches Platt. Dämmen durch luchtigen, hochgeborene Fürste und Fürstinnen, Herren und Frowen, Herren Wilhelm und Frowen Sibylla, Markgräfinne von Brandenburg, zu Herzog und Herzoginne, zu Jülche und zu dem Berge, Gräve und Gräfinne zu Ravensburg, Herre und Frowe zu Heinsberg und zu Levenburg, minen willigen schuldigen Dienst als sie zu bewohren. Durch lüchtige, hochgeborene Fürste und Fürstinne, liebe Herre und Frowe, es ich, Arnold von Harve, Ritter geboren, aus eure fürstlichen Gnade landen des Herzogtums von Jülche, haben nobelig Pilgrimazien vollbracht. In dem Jahr Dommes Gräf nach Christus ihr Geburt, 1400 99 des 10. Tags Oktobri bin ich erst zu Eure fürstliche Gnaden kommen zu Heinsberg, der welche mich ehrlich anfangen und willkommen geheißen hat mit Schinkunger und an der Gunst mich alter gegabet, dass ich allzeit meine schuldige willige Dienst will Eure fürstlichen Gnaden truwillig verdienen. So doch darum han ich mich wieder gemüllt und geflissen, Eure beider Gnaden zu ehren in well befallen diesen Pilgrimazieren, wie ich die vollbrachen habe und so weiter.
Well done. Sehr gut. Great. I think that was a really nice finishing point for the presentation, to end with a dedication. I would like to dedicate this to all the history of the book students, past and present, and thank very much for your collective presentation.